I want to talk briefly about something I noticed in two of Khabib's fights because there are only two on UFC Fight Pass that allow me to hear the corner audio, the first being Khabib's fight against Pat Healy. And Khabib was cornered by Josh Thompson in this fight, and it was very interesting to hear his advice as he was fighting. Obviously, Khabib's striking overall is a bit unorthodox, and they were very worried he would get caught with a punch and imploring him to take down Healy, which eventually he did so, but Josh wanted his hands to be up and to punch his way to the clinch to make the fight easier. Khabib usually has a very clear path to victory against his opponents, and he consistently shows he will stand and trade, even at the apparent risk of getting knocked out. The same exact scenario goes down with his most recent fight against Michael Johnson, but it was Javier Mendez in his corner. Mendez was yelling for Khabib to relax and use head movement and, of course, to take Michael Johnson down. He also told Khabib not to freeze in the pocket, and how they've worked on that. We saw Khabib get touched with a few shots, one that may have wobbled him, but really nothing severe enough to stamp him as being a chinny fighter, but it definitely showed that there are holes to be exposed in his striking defense. I'm not sure what it is about Khabib that makes him so willing to stand and trade with fighters, when more often than not he has a huge advantage wrestling. Perhaps it's his ego and pride. It could be his nervousness, but nonetheless, it's something I find interesting. Not to say he's a bad striker because he is deceptively good, but I think it's risky, and apparently his coaches and cornermen think so too. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm going to highlight a few things I've noticed and things people may not know about or have forgotten about. So I'm going all over the place. Stick with me. First, I know a lot of you are curious how Tony Ferguson's rolls and Darce chokes will work against Khabib, if at all. Obviously, that is impossible to predict, but we actually can turn to one fight in particular that offer us a few clues and maybe a little foreshadowing. Khabib's fight against Abel Trujillo may be remembered as a one-sided affair, which in the end it was, but Abel did roll several times to escape the initial takedown and sometimes end up in a better position. Abel's overall wrestling and grappling game seemed several steps below Khabib's, so it really didn't work out for him in the end. However, it does make you wonder if another fighter who has a more refined wrestling and grappling game may be able to take advantage of rolling. There is really no other fighter that comes to mind other than Tony Ferguson. He doesn't have to roll under for a leg lock, but rather just find a better position or create a scramble. Although he may find success rolling, I do find it to be a little high risk against Khabib's style. Nonetheless, it could make Khabib work harder to find a dominant position and allow Tony to get back to his feet. We also have to keep in mind Tony's elbows and submission threats off his back. He isn't like the Blackzilian fighters Michael Johnson and Abel Trujillo. If you're in tune with the sport, you know the history some of the Blackzilians have had against grapplers, Anthony Johnson included. It also helps that Khabib has had enough fights to get a healthy amount of tape to study from and learn his tactics. I don't think it's fair to look at someone like Michael Johnson, who has had a history of struggling against wrestlers, and automatically assume he will do that to Ferguson. Not to mention, Khabib was taken down twice by Abel Trujillo, without much success after, but he still was able to do it. Before any takedowns occur though, we have to look at what happens in between the striking and the takedown. For that, I like to look at where Khabib may not have had success taking someone down, and that is his fight against Gleison Tibau. Out of 13 attempted takedown attempts, Khabib didn't get any. That forced Khabib to either work on the outside striking or just hold Tibau against the cage. And for the newer fans or those that don't remember, this was a controversial win for Khabib. A few media outlets had scored the fight for Tibau, and honestly, had this fight taken place under the new judging criteria, I think he would have lost that fight. But it was still close enough that it really didn't matter much. I think what is important is Ferguson being able to keep this fight mostly contested on the feet and do damage in the clinch. Khabib has relentless pressure, and that will be the most difficult aspect to control, but it's not as if Khabib automatically gets every takedown he strives for. Even Michael Johnson successfully defended a few, but as I broke down in my pre-fight study, Johnson's speed gives up accuracy, and he was also overextending on his shots. I think at range, whether at kicking or boxing or the clinch, a lot of strikes down the center line are likely going to work. Khabib has improved his defense, and he eats a lot of shots on the arms or rolls with the shots that land. He looks awkward, but it's been effective for the most part. However, he does swarm and repeats the same patterns of attack. He attacks and retreats in straight lines, so front kicks, teeps, uppercuts, flying knees, straights, jabs, and step-in elbows are all going to find a home in certain scenarios against Khabib. It seemed to me Michael Johnson was trying to punch around the guard of Khabib, similar to what Eddie Alvarez did to RDA, so hooks can definitely be in play as well, although I think the lead hand hook or check hook will be more successful, especially if Tony can do that from southpaw. What Tony will have to overcome is simply maintaining range, and even though he has a reach advantage, he isn't always able to maintain it effectively. Abel Trujillo was able to swarm Tony, and although he didn't have a lot of success, the point is that he could bridge the gap without much consequence early on. He did drop Tony in that fight and double leg him too. Khabib doesn't always swarm, however, he also draws his opponents in, similar to what we see Tyron Woodley do. That way, when his back is to the fence and his opponent overextends, he can grab a hold of them. Khabib is also very good off his back, as we saw when Abel Trujillo began rolling. He was able to find an advantage in almost every position. On the feet, Khabib's offense can be very effective. It's the classic case of a fighter using their wrestling as a threat. We've seen it countless times now. Use the wrestling as a threat to set up the hands. Khabib always ducks low and comes up high, many times with the uppercut. His punches are wide and looping. He's a confusing fighter to read. Khabib is good at tying up and separating the land strikes, then pressing forward again with the wrestling. He's a handful to deal with at close range. Just because Khabib's stand-up looks green and is seemingly waiting to be exploited, it is surprisingly effective. Now we're left with so many moving parts in this fight, it becomes very hard to narrow down. In one hand you have Tony that is multifaceted and dangerous everywhere, against Khabib, who has shown to be very dominant at controlling position. I think Tony definitely has more ways to win and can steal it from the judges if Khabib doesn't do enough to impress the judges while in top position. Tony is very active in the guard, and judges are beginning to finally favor that instead of the fighter just laying in position. Same with the clinch, just because a fighter is holding someone against the fence, their inability to improve position from there is getting recognized, as well as the fighter throwing knees on the inside. Khabib does well attacking from top position and advancing, but I'm not sure how well he'll do against someone like Tony Ferguson, so if this fight goes to the judges, I can see it being extremely controversial. The odds currently show Khabib as a -210 favorite and Ferguson at +175. I'm not sure if this is the hype train or I'm just not seeing something, but I think this is a pick'em. I've seen some already snatch Ferguson up for a good price, and kudos to them. I mean, we haven't even seen Khabib go 5 rounds. We don't know what his cardio looks like past the third. Betting is a risky business, but I think Ferguson could end up with a victory here, so I say why not take a stab at it. I've swayed back and forth trying to make a pick between these two as well. I can see a strong argument for either man. But I am going to go with Khabib Nurmagomedov as my official pick, and I'll explain why. Although Ferguson is a vet in the UFC, can arguably be in his prime years of fighting, is very well-rounded, dangerous everywhere, and has gone 5 rounds, there are a few things that outweigh Khabib's weaknesses. Tony has been rocked and dropped, he's recovered well and came back to win, but still, that makes me feel uneasy. I also don't believe he's fought a wrestler of Khabib's caliber yet, and someone who is so relentless with trying for takedowns, and I wonder how that will pan out for 5 rounds. Another reason is Tony's rolls and his commitments to submissions. I think Tony has another great opportunity to lock in a Darce in this fight, but what if that fails? What if Tony rolls for legs, pulls guard for submissions, and he doesn't get them? Then he's just giving up position. I also think Tony is going to try for takedowns on Khabib too, and Khabib's no slouch off his back either. Lastly, even though Khabib can really telegraph his punches and shoot too far out for takedowns or swarm his opponents with his face first, I don't really know how well Tony is able to fight off his back foot. It's just a difficult fight to foresee because of the seemingly endless amount of outcomes that could happen in this fight. So as I said, I think you're safe to pick on either side. Many analysts and bettors I watch are going with Ferguson, and I can't say I disagree. Khabib has a lot of questions coming in, and hopefully Tony is able to expose some of those holes in his game, but I think when it's all said and done, Khabib will walk away with a close decision victory. But now it's time for You Forgot to Mention, the part of the video where you leave a comment and you tell me what I forgot to mention about this fight. Don't forget to leave your pick, and also follow me on Twitter. I'm close to 1,000 followers, and I need to hit that mark, so twitter.com/rabbitmma. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the fights.